know her name's Jennifer Narda.
Yes, don't be shy.
I don't know, it's not more like a shy. I think it's more like I don't like if I say something bad now, it's on video.
That's true.
That's my
I guess we can cut it out.
yeah, we'll edit it out. We'll just have like bleeps or something.
You have quite the track record.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for coming. This is the first interview practice workshop for Consulting Club. May I ask you, how many are you international students? Just raise your hand. So I see
We
that.
got some good internationals in the house.
Yeah, it's a majority here. Okay. So Jeff gonna start this, and Seth will. Oh come on! I'm international. It's in the morning. You understand?
Well, can that be my excuse too? If there's anything? I'm international. It's like 9 o'clock at home. I'm so confused.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so thank you all for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeff Galloway. This past summer I interned at Deloitte Consulting with my good friend JJ here. So to give you a bit of my background, I'm from Canada. Before coming down here to do the MBA program, our second year MBA program. Before coming down here I worked as a supply chain role back in Canada. And that was really my interest coming down here, was focused on supply chain analytics and to get into consulting in that sense. So I interned at Deloitte. I did a fair bit of that. I did a fair bit of like logistics analytics over the summer, and it was a lot of fun. I had a great time, and I can't wait to start back up there next year. I had a blast. Can't say enough good things about it. So it's a little bit about me. Do you guys give a few words quick?
Would you please speak a little bit louder?
Sure. So I know a lot of you have heard my spiel several times.
On camera here.
But my name is Seth Fleming. I also worked in supply chain for about 5 years before coming back to school. And I'm currently a second year in the full-time MBA program. I spent my summer, this past summer, interning at W.P.Carey. Also a really, really good experience. It's a phenomenal company. One thing that I think we'll try and highlight for you guys over the course of these workshops is that there's a lot of overlap in how you frame and structure your thinking for these case interviews. But there's also a lot of differences in how W.P.Carey does case interviews versus how Deloitte does case interviews versus how even other companies might do case interviews. But if we can give you guys a good framework to structure your thinking, it should be applicable in any one of those settings. So I'm looking forward to working with you guys.
So I'm JJ Fairbanks. I also interned at Deloitte out of San Francisco this summer. The good news is I've never done consulting before. I'd never done supply chain work before. Before the MBA program, I was working on a family business developing a commercial-sized solar power facility. So there were some aspects of finance, some aspects of trying to get procurement, but it was never official, it was never a corporate setting. So for my opportunity to actually go into a corporate setting and work in a very different environment was very encouraging for me. So I guess you don't have to have tons and tons of experience, just pay attention to these cases and have a good mind.
Thank you very much, guys. So a quick overview of some of the stuff we're going to cover today. I'd just like to say, first of all, keep it informal. I don't want this to be like a class where I'm teaching you. Like, cases and case interviews are inherently like back and forth in a dialogue. So feel free to jump in, ask questions, interrupt me, make jokes. Like, it's Friday, we're not in class. Please don't treat it like class.
And there's no need to dress up for these meetings unless we have like a speaker of some type.
Yeah, I'm assuming you guys are dressed up for some other reason. So.
And that's fine too. But if you dress up for this, there's no need for that unless we have like a speaker coming in or something like that. But if we're just teaching, it's going to be pretty laid back, pretty formal.
Yeah, I appreciate that you put on a shirt this morning.
I usually don't on Fridays. But
Yeah.
today I did
It's
for
rock
you guys.
Friday. And we have Alicia too. Okay, so I'm going to run through a quick background on what case interviews are for. I hope that you got her on camera. And here's Alicia.
This is my job here.
Thank you. We're going to talk a little about recruiters and the interviews, the people you're going to meet throughout the process over these next couple months. I don't know, have you guys met any recruiters yet, or has anybody been on campus so far? Or? Okay, well, for consulting companies, or is it just for other companies so far? Okay, so you've got some practice meeting with HR people, and that's good. So we're also going to talk about what to expect in the first round interviews and in the later rounds, and how they're different. That they're still case interviews, or just more difficult case interviews, more or less. I'm going to run through case in point. Quick raise of hands is who has case in point so far? All right, good to see. For those of you who don't have it, it's a very good And I'm also going to give a quick run through of some basic financial ratios and stuff you should know. I'm going to give a run through of some financials you should know. It's better?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. So, case interviews, as you guys know, commonly used by consulting companies. Also, if there's any errors in this, feel free to let me know. I just kind of threw this together over the last couple of days, so let me know. They're commonly used by consulting companies, becoming more and more common in industry. They're designed to be more pressure than a standard interview question. So it really is built so that you guys are put into like a real life type situation where you're going to be challenged, you're going to have pressure, and you're going to have to come up with something even though it's going to be stressful. So realistically, in my opinion, based on that, the most important thing to do is practice and get as comfortable as you can in those sort of environments because you're going to be facing them a lot. Not only in industry if you end up doing this type of work, but through interviews for other companies too. It's just a valuable skill to have gone through as many practice interviews as you can. So, highly recommended. And also it's different from most types of interviews in that it'll actually combine both written and verbal tests compared to, has there been interviews on campus yet, or is this too early still?
For Deloitte and W.P.Carey?
Oh no, I just mean for like any company if there's been interviews yet. But
I think next week we'll start up.
that's so strange, isn't it though?
Yeah, it
Like,
is.
I'm sorry, like, that sucks. I remember doing that last year. That was so strange to come back to school and have to do interviews before you even had learned anything. So, but that's the way it goes. So yeah, it's different from most interviews you guys have ever done because there will be written and verbal components, and you'll have to get comfortable with how you're going to integrate those two to come up with a solid reasoning and a solid answers to the questions you're going to face. So any questions so far? Or? Okay, go.
So obviously, prepping for these case interviews, we're trying to get a job also, but has prepping for these interviews also helped you in terms of performing the job or even like other things outside of consulting?
I personally think so. I think it really has been helpful in a lot of ways. I think one way that it's helpful is being comfortable in like one-on-one or one with a couple other people in terms of negotiations or working on solutions for things, because if you're comfortable in those stressful environments, it really can translate into different fields. So you guys?
No, I would echo that. It's incredibly helpful. I mean, what they're doing in these interviews is evaluating your ability to take a problem that may or may not seem complex and break it down into workable parts to come up with a reasonable solution. And at a very superficial level, that's a skill that you need to utilize in any job, no matter what you have. And it's also a skill that you can utilize in other types of interviews, even if they're not explicitly case-based interviews. So I agree with Jeff. I found it to be really helpful, this type of conditioning in your mind in the real workplace as well.
Yeah. And in your personal life.
Well, one additional thing that's nice is it's not just tell me at a time when and then people, and you just get to go. Like in these, they'll actually challenge you and ask you why you're thinking the way you are. So in different client exposure that I had this last summer, we would say something and the client would be like, well, why is that? They challenge our assumptions. So being able to frame the way that you speak so that they understand where you're coming from so they don't have to put up the roadblock saying, explain yourself. You naturally try to explain the logic as you present it, so then it's just one fluid flow of information. So that's something that I really liked.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, that it really is designed to be like the job. So they're doing this for a reason. They use these interviews because they wanted to see how you will perform in that environment. So yeah, like I was saying earlier, it really is an interactive two-way discussion. You don't think of the interviewer as somebody who's like against you and trying to figure out what's wrong with you or what your problems are. They're there to get to know you. They want to get inside your head and know the way you think. Think of them as a friend and it'll work out a lot better. That was something that I found worked out really well for me throughout the interview process, was trying to befriend these people beforehand. You're going to have a lot of social events you'll get to meet them at. So, or for the MBA people anyways, there's going to be a whole bunch of events like the wine mixers and stuff for Deloitte anyways. There was a couple W.P.Carey events as well. And then for whatever other companies, I'm sure they'll be doing events as well. So get to know these people. Try not to just ask serious questions all the time. Try to become friends because that's going to really pay off when you sit down to do interviews. You guys?
Yeah, I would add to that. In doing that at those events, prior to the interview, you're building a good foundation, and don't freak out and forget about that when you get into the interview room. Because even when you're trying to go through these cases, develop your methodologies, and structure your solutions, they're there to help you, honestly. You can ask them clarifying questions, and if you ask something that's inappropriate, they just won't answer you, or they'll tell you that they're not going to answer it. But there's no harm in asking clarification or trying to rationalize or justify your assumptions when you're going through that process. So they really are there as an ally.
Yeah.
I brought my wife to the mixers as a way to actually get to know them as a human being, not just as a business asset. So, you know, don't be too casual, but still like open up about who you are as a human being.
Yeah, that's
Because really, they talk about, I don't know how many times we've heard over the summer, past the airport test, I'm stuck in an airport for 6 hours, do I actually want to sit next to you for those 6 hours? So you have to pass those tests or else really, they don't want you around all that much. So be a good person to be around just in general.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, that things like bringing your wives and getting to know these people on a real level, because they're people at the end of the day too, and they just want to get to know who you are. And when I think back to my interviews, like the people that I interviewed with both in the first round and the later rounds, it was all people that I'd met before. Like that's huge if you have some kind of rapport with them already, because if they know who you are, they think, oh, it's Jeff, I know him. Like that's huge. So get to know the people.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
One of the pressures is that, for example, competition itself.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are going to an interview, who are we competing with? Is it my classmate? Is it a top tier student that we're competing with? Or is it just winning the heart and mind of the interviewer?
Yeah, that's really your competition is you're competing with yourself to be the best you can be. I wouldn't worry about the other people. They have no fixed number in mind of people they're recruiting. They're going to recruit as many good people as they can. So just be the best you can be and try not to worry about what anybody else is doing. You're not really competing with people at other schools. Don't think of it that way, because the group that's coming here to recruit, they recruit here at ASU. So you're not dealing with other schools at all. And they're going to take as many people. It's not a fixed number, so just do the best you can, and that's what really matters. But very good question. So also for case interviews, there's no perfect answer. It can really go in any direction at all. The point is, it's a lot more about the process, which you can find out. But when they go into this, they really don't have an answer in mind they're looking for. It's really more of a thought process they're looking for. So don't just sit there and make your notes and spit out a number. Even if it's completely correct, you just did it wrong. So don't think of it that way. And yeah, the whole point of the case interview, like I was saying, lets them see your thought process and tries to create a real environment. So cover that stuff already. What are you guys talking about over there?
You have an S after let's, fourth line down. Oh, yes. Let.
Apostrophe.
Oh, let's see interview. Maybe it needs to get. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you though. Yeah.
Hey, you asked for it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, we should know this after doing deck cells. By the way, if you're doing consulting, you'll have to get good at PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Don't let this be representative of a quality PowerPoint deck. This is a PowerPoint deck I did while sitting in class over the past week, so it's not perfect by any means.
PowerPoint, Excel.
Yeah, you'll get good at it. Yeah, if you don't like one of those programs, like get out. You're gonna have to like
Any
it.
internship though, every internship's Excel and PowerPoint, so get comfortable with it like now.
Okay, good point. Yeah. Sorry, Alicia.
So when I do math, I do math in my head in Chinese, and then when I translate it if I just think in my head, it will be a lot clearer. So
Yeah.
do you think I should write it down when I calculate, or they actually expect me to do it in your head, or I should explain it to them?
Totally, write down as much as you want.
Okay.
That's the point of having the pen and paper there, is to get comfortable writing. Like, when I did my interviews, I'd use up a couple pieces of paper, and it can just be scraps so you don't mess up the number in your head. It's a really good idea to just write as much down. So I don't know if I'd write it down in Chinese. That might not signal the right things, but.
And I would also get in the habit, and which we'll get into in future sessions as we actually start to practice these, but of just actively thinking out loud. I mean, that's what really lets these interviewers see how your thought processes work. It's one thing to kind of do it all in your head and then tell them about it. It's another thing to kind of think out loud and show them what you're going through along the way.
Yeah.
And not to say you have to have it right the first time. If you want to backtrack on your own methodology, they're okay with that. But it gives them more insights as to who you are and how you're structuring this problem and how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, and that ties back to the whole building a dialogue and building rapport. So just keep that in mind, that you want to be talking to these people as much as possible. You don't want there to be a couple minutes of silence in the interview as you're just taking your notes. So.
How long should we wait? How long do we have time to think for each question? Is there a...
Until it gets uncomfortable.
Okay.
That'll be up to you. Mm-hmm. Like personally, when I was doing it, I just tried to keep talking, then sorry, I just need a second to write for a bit, and just take a minute or something and get your numbers down.
So just first of all, think out loud, and then build on top of things.
Yeah,
Lots of experience.
yeah, just think and build on it. Yeah, Alicia, you know this stuff. Yeah, you're pro. Okay. So a little bit on what recruiters are actually looking for through doing these case interviews, because everything they're doing is for a reason. They're there to get to know you, and for these reasons. They want to see that you can quickly analyze information. They're going to throw a lot of data at you, and you need to be able to quickly parse through that and figure out what's important. And yeah, figure out what's most important out of that information. They want to look at your thought process and see that it is logical and it flows through, looking at all the different options that are valuable and what they think are important to consider with the problem. So you'll need to have some basically business knowledge of understanding what the potential problems are with the problems you'll be given. And of course, communication skills. The big one here is listening skills. Like, they want, when they're telling you stuff, don't interrupt them. Like, it's very important to just listen, take notes. And that's a huge part of consulting in general when you're working in industry is when you're working with clients, they're going to be telling you stuff. You have to be a good listener. You have to take excellent notes. And you have to be ready to give that information back and have opinions on it almost immediately. So that's a very good skill to have, to keep in mind and to build on right now is that take good notes, listen well, and yeah, ask important questions is huge as well. So, sorry, we have a question.
Yeah, is it okay to take notes while the interviewer is saying something? Because sometimes
totally.
it can get distracting, like if someone's speaking to you and they're just looking down and writing.
Yeah, that's totally fine. It's expected in case interviews that you're going to be taking notes. And you can even say if they're going too fast, if there's too much, just ask them to pause for a second. You just got to catch up and write notes. So that's not an issue. And that's something, like if I were working with a client, that's something that I do. I mean, if they're saying too much that I can't keep up, I'd say just wait a second. So it's totally okay to do that and take as much notes as you can.
And it's okay to ask clarification questions after the fact.
Yeah, if you think you might have got something wrong, it's way better to double check than to go with the wrong information. So feel free to double check your numbers as much as you need to.
So in case interviews, do they provide us with sufficient information to solve the problem, or should we ask for them?
They'll give you a lot of information, and a lot of it is useful to answer certain questions. But I remember part of my interview, the lady asked me to do something, and I was looking at the information, and I couldn't figure it out. And she's like, "Are you missing something?" I was like, "Yes, I need this." She's like, "Good, I'm glad you asked, because here it is." Like, she was waiting for me to find what else I needed to answer her question. So they'll give you a lot, and most of it you can use to answer the questions, but they also want you to figure out what you're missing so you can ask the right questions, because that's part of the client-facing issue is knowing what questions to ask and what information you're missing still.
Yeah, so I think that summarizes it very well. And also your ability to just clearly convey your ideas and thoughts. So communication, it's such a communication-based job. Like, I spent a ton of time in front of clients over the summer as just an intern. Like, these people, once they get higher up in the companies, it's almost all people-based. So they want to keep that in mind for your long-term growth. Consulting is you need to be able to communicate well with people. So yeah, it's huge. So keep that in mind in the interviews. And of course, confidence. They don't want people who are going to have trouble going onto a client site and meeting people and figuring out what the problems are. You need to be able to jump into a problem and be confident and have confidence in your skills that you'll be able to solve whatever problems they're going to give you. So it's important to convey that throughout your interviews as well. And of course, they've talked about the airplane test. So do you guys all understand that? Okay.
I have a question about the confidence you mentioned. During your internship, did you get a chance to meet C-level people for your projects, or did you work with mid-management?
So for me, first of all, I worked with mostly middle management. It wasn't a lot of really high-up people. I worked with some different product directors. So it wasn't the highest end people, but it was some fairly high-level people.
And I think the answer to that question, it's going to vary not just company to company, but also project to project. So on my specific project, W.P.Carey, I had a pretty good amount of FaceTime and dialogue with the partner who was in charge of that project. And I was lucky. He was a partner who was very hands-on and very willing to work with lowly interns like me. And that's not always going to be the case at W.P.Carey or elsewhere. So it really just depends on the project. But like Jeff, most of my time was spent with like senior managers and more, which are kind of a mid-level management position. But in my case, I did have the opportunity for some good FaceTime with partners.
I was at Cisco, so I sure didn't see the CEO. But our project, one of the things that we did turn in that got financed did go through all the way through to the CEO, so he saw it, and he could tell us going on. But there was no, $50 billion company.
But over the career consulting, you definitely would. So it's definitely a skill that you need to have. So over the next few weeks, lucky you guys, you get to meet with various recruiters and HR people. They'll be on here on campus pimping their companies as hard as they can, trying to tell you you need to apply and get involved. And you'll also be meeting with various practitioners throughout the process. So the HR people you'll initially be meeting aren't likely to be the people who will be interviewing you. You're going to be interviewed by different levels of practitioners throughout the interview process. So as I put here, like in my first rounds anyways, it was all with people at like more the manager level, and then in the later rounds it'd be more with senior managers and with partners. So I don't know if you guys have worked with them at all, but they're fairly intense, knowledgeable people, so like I said, the more practice the better in getting comfortable with those sort of environments.
Can you give us a little bit more detail on this? For example, the first round, what was the experience from?
Oh, I'm going to talk about the interviews for sure. This was just like an introduction.
Oh, okay, you were going to that. Okay.
So there you go. How about that? Okay, so the first round for my consulting interviews last year, anyways. The first section was more of a behavioral section, so this is just to give you an idea of what you guys can expect. Of course, why you're interested in consulting, have a solid backstory for that. They're going to ask you that no matter what, so you need to have a good pitch ready of why it's right for you and why this is the point in your life, why you're ready for it. And keep in mind too, they'll probably ask like how long you want to do it for, because there's a lot of people who do it for 3 or 4 years and then drop out and go to industry, and that's totally okay in a lot of situations. Like, be honest. They want to know the reality behind what you're thinking and what you're looking for in this industry. So, they're going to give you a lot of give me an example of, and this isn't just consulting interviews, this is all interviews, so be ready for these type of questions. You're going to be seeing them a lot over the next few weeks. So, yes?
So you have a lot of good information. Would you be sending us a copy of this?
Yeah, if you want a copy of this, let me know. I can send it out for sure. So, and this is just some random ones that I remember getting. Like, one that I got a lot was time you failed at something, which is important. That you can't be a dick and be like, oh yeah, I've never failed at anything anyway. I'm the greatest thing ever. So don't go that route. Try to think of a time, at least for me what worked, was thinking of a failure of a time that I really screwed something up, but I was able to like double down on it and turn it around at the end. So that's a really valuable opportunity to show that you don't give up when you're faced with challenges. So keep that in mind. That's a question you'll see. Definitely have one planned out for that. You'll see too, like the time you implemented an idea that you had that you were able to take to your company and really make a difference by implementing this. And you want to have numbers in mind here. Like, I don't know if you guys have done like the star stories and stuff. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the little star story format. Just keep in mind the questions they'll be asking and how you want to convey the information you want to convey. So for something like this, the time I implemented the idea, the things I'd be looking to convey would be that I first can come up with good ideas. Second of all, that I know how to get them done and build relationships with people to help make it happen. And third, that it really makes a difference in the company that I'm doing it for. So you want to have numbers in mind, like benefits that the company actually derived from your project or from your idea. So definitely keep that in mind and work on that. And yeah, they could ask anything. So try to I just come up with random ones and work with other people when you're doing your practice interviews. Come up with random questions they might ask because they could come at you with anything here.
One I would add that I saw in not just a lot of consulting interviews, but a lot of supply chain interviews, is tell me about a time you used data to solve a problem. Because they're always analyzing your ability to analyze data and use that to pull out the relevant piece of information and actually derive important recommendations.
Yeah, that's a really good one too. I remember seeing that as well. So these are important questions you guys will see. So definitely take the time to prep.
It is almost the same as other interviews.
Yeah, for the
in
behavioral
the
section.
section. Okay.
These are just some examples from consulting ones specifically that I remember getting. And of course, why that specific company. Have a backstory in mind of why you're looking at them, because I mean they want you to be there for a reason, and you should have a good reason for being there at that company. And keep in mind too, like I put who are you, like for example, I was the Canadian who worked at the tire company. Think of how you want to frame yourself and how they're going to remember you, because they're going to meet you at all these events. And if you're nobody, then you're nobody. Like, try to keep in mind something that they want to remember you by. Like, I use that, for example, because when I worked at the tire company, I worked in the supply chain role where I did a lot of really cool stuff and did a lot of like inventory optimization and saved them a bunch of money. So if I can kind of associate myself with that, as that's how they view me, that's a bonus. So keep in mind who you want to be throughout this process, because you'll be somebody in their minds. They don't get to know the full you. They only know the you they see in the few hours that you'll be with them. So. Oh, that was like a a stereotype more than anything I was going for.
I would say the answer is no, though. Like, mine's not like my go-to when they say, like, tell me about yourself or who are you. I always say that I grew up in blue-collar Ohio, so I like to convey that, you know, I have work ethic and that I, you know.
Picture him with the straw in his mouth.
Yeah, I wear a farmer's hat. No, just I like to convey that, you know, I'm accountable. I don't think anything comes for free. You have to work for it, which obviously has ties to the working world, but it's not like I did this for work and these were the results. It's more of a generic thing.
Yeah, you have a lot of options to go with it. Yeah. So keep that in mind when you're prepping for interviews. And the point of all these questions really are to test all the things I've listed there. They want to test that you're confident. They want to get to know your personality, get to know your background, and see if you've done your homework on the company. So these are all things they're going to be checking for. So keep those in mind. So the actual case questions, these are a couple random examples that I came up with, types of case questions you can see in the first round. They'll generally be back of the envelope type calculations you'll be asked about. There could be some data or charts, but generally it'll just be a verbal thing that they're giving you, and you're going to work it out pen and paper after asking some clarifying questions and stating your assumptions. They're, like I said, they're there to test your ability to analyze information, to communicate, and to figure out what really are the most important problems they're giving you. And yeah, just those two things are really what's going to decide if you move on to the next round. And keep in mind that the people you're interviewing with, they want to send the best people to the partners and senior managers. These aren't the same people who are going to be interviewing you. So this is their shot at figuring out if they want to work with you, if they think you could do the job. So don't try to be too extreme in any direction, but try to be solid. Yes?
This might be a lot off track, but how important are GPAs for consulting companies?
It depends. I don't think it's the most important thing. They care a lot about like your background, personality. You've done some interesting stuff. A lot of them care about the GMAT score. If you have a high GMAT score, put that on your resume. But it totally depends. It's not. There's no one thing they're looking for.
I would say though, GPA, it's certainly not the deal breaker.
Yeah.
It probably does matter more for consulting than for any other job you're going to apply to. So it matters in that sense, but to Jeff's point, there's a lot of things they're looking at, and if, you know, what Deloitte values the most might be different from what Carney values the most. So it's kind of a tough question to answer.
Yeah, it totally depends. I don't think I was ever asked my GPA until like the end. So
I don't think they know my GPA yet. I got a full-time offer, so I mean, it might matter, but it might not.
yeah.
I know for Deloitte, like within the MBA program, they don't care at all. They're like, all we need is a letter that you passed your classes, and that's it. We don't even get to know your GPAs in your MBA class. So like so undergrad, sure, higher's better, but your classes right now, they don't care.
Do they pick up their undergrad GPA?
Well, it's part of the applications.
I think they asked it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I was ever asked about it at all.
I don't think I explicitly was asked.
There was a person or two who Deloitte excused from interviews because of low undergrad GPAs. So I'm talking like really low though.
What's low?
Like
Yeah.
under 3.
Okay.
So I would imagine most people are probably going to be okay.
I had a 3.2 to give you an example. Like, I don't think that's really high, but I think it's fine. So,
What about GMAT?
it totally depends. I don't think it's the most important thing. It depends on the company. If you have a really high one, it'll help you. If you have a really low one, I don't think it'll hurt you that much.
Do you advise us, for example, if I have a low GMAT compared to many, not over 700, just go study and take the GMAT again?
No, I wouldn't. I think it's not a differentiator.
I had a 650. I had a pretty low GMAT. So, I had a high GPA, so maybe that balances things out. But
Yeah, it's more like I think a high GMAT can help you differentiate almost. It's something they would notice, but it's like a low one's not going to hurt you. You know what I'm saying? It's not. It's just a standardized test that, like, it doesn't mean anything. I find the whole GMAT thing to be overvalued anyways. It's kind of like a 3-hour exam. Like, depends how well you do right then at that time.
It's really cliche, but realistically, like just like for MBA programs, they are looking at the full package. So like a high GPA might help you, a high GMAT might help you, but those things by themselves aren't going to get you in. And if you don't have those things, it's not going to kick you out. It really is the full package.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is the person.
They want the person and the skills. Keep that in mind. Just be the person, build the skills.
Yeah, when I was doing my internship, there were lots of people from really good school. They have a thing called non-disclosure, so you don't actually have to disclose your GPA or GMAT. Like the company can ask you.
Yeah, a lot of schools, yeah, like people I was talking about at Berkeley, they actually can't give any information. So.
Michigan doesn't even do GPAs for MBAs.
Yeah, that's like a new emerging thing. So
ASU will be there next year. Probably. Who's copycat?
Then
Okay,
let's
so
go.
I covered this stuff, I think. So you guys have an idea what kind of thing you'd see. And there'll also be a period for you to ask questions. It's important to do your homework and have some questions in mind that you're going to want to ask. So questions about the company, questions about the lifestyle. Like I said, it really isn't for everyone. Make sure the lifestyle is for you. And feel free to ask us about our experiences or get real expectations about it, because like I could see if I had a family with kids or something, it wouldn't work for me. But it could work for you. So ask the questions. It's important to know the reality behind it and see what you'd be facing. And like I put here, it's an opportunity to show that you've done your homework. So they give you a lot of opportunities to show things, so take advantage of them. This is another one. Any questions there?
Like what? Like go and research about Deloitte itself,
Yeah,
or
sure.
about people?
I'd research about the company and some of the things they're doing that you might be interested in. Like one of the things I was interested in, because I'm really interested in supply chain analytics, I did a bit of research on what they're doing in supply chain analytics so that I could come in and ask questions about that, which was valuable because people I interviewed with actually had some interest in that too. So just things you're interested in, research what the company's doing. It's
and
huge.
I think it always helps to ask about that person's individual experiences for a couple of reasons. One, we're human beings and we're selfish, so we can talk about ourselves very easily. So it allows the interviewer to do that. And when you get them talking about themselves, it kind of reinforces that personal connection that Jeff talked about earlier. And helps you kind of build that, because you do get to learn about them. And you can use their experiences as a tool to teach you, is this the lifestyle that I want, or is this the kind of job that I want?
Yeah, questions like that too to reinforce that relationship are very valuable. So, really good point.
How important is our specialization for this? Because, for example, for JJ, it was the first year without prior consulting experience, or so.
Oh, JJ still has the skills, so that's what's important.
Well,
No. It's special. I'm talking about specialization itself.
Yeah, so I didn't have the experience, but I did have the interest. So I really tried to express how much I was interested in what it is that they're doing, the consulting is, and what I can glean from it, but what I can also contribute from it because of my perspective of a non-corporate business. So the ability for me to go, trudge my own way, that's something that I'm sure they were excited to have. So pitch whatever you have in the light that you can, but I just showed my excitement for the opportunity.
For the time you spend there, do you think there's a chance that we enter there, let's say through supply chain, and then change afterwards to, let's say, marketing consulting? How do you see that?
Personally, I think that's totally viable. I've heard of people doing that already, going in and switching to something else they're interested in. But the thing to do is, if that's what you're interested in, try to find something that'll combine the two, maybe in a project once you're there full time. But like, for example, I'm really interested in finance as well. So I'm going to try to get on some projects that'll combine both, so that if I want to, I can transition to that later and have a stronger background. But yeah, it's totally doable. You're not going to get too pigeonholed right away, I don't think.
I'm asking this since they're Deloitte and Deloitte, for example, they're coming here for supply chain.
Yeah.
And so there is an opportunity, for example, for me that I'm interested in marketing, start from supply chain, then switch. That's a good thing to
I
know.
would say at the internship level, you're not going to have a lot of flexibility. Like W.P.Carey is coming here specifically for their procurement analytical solutions group, which is their supply chain wing. And so as an intern, you're not going to go into W.P.Carey as an intern and be put on like a marketing project. It's going to be very supply chain centric. But I think a lot of the points Jeff was making are very relevant when you get there full time, and you're able to start building your network and expanding your skill sets. That's when you can start carrying over, your abilities and your skills from one project maybe into a new functional area that's also of interest to you.
And being in one of these companies for a couple of years too is huge, valuable to have on your resume. Like you can transfer to other industries and other companies once you're in with consulting. It's just a lot of people move around. There's a lot of opportunities. Yes.
Yeah, so from your internship experience, what would you say was the average time frame of the project? Because I know that I was in the consulting industry, but then so you travel 5 days a week, 4 days a week, based on client, and you travel to the client location. But are you based out of a central Deloitte office, say in one of the big cities in the US?
Yeah, so I was based at San Francisco. I traveled 4 days a week. Oddly enough, I separated my place out here, moved to San Francisco, and then was traveling back to Phoenix. So, but yeah, I was traveling for the whole, actually for 9 of the 10 weeks. So there was a week where I was actually based at San Francisco. So, and that'll depend on the project.
And how long was the project? Like, did you work on multiple projects during the summer, or was it?
I was on the same one the whole time. Yeah, which I think you guys were as well, right? So.
Yeah, so I was based in Chicago, and then staffed in New York. So like Jeff, I was on the road 4 days a week between Chicago and New York. And in my experience, I was on the same project the entire time. I got there right at the start of it, so it was a good time to come on board. But overall, it's an 18-month project, so obviously I didn't get to see the end of it in my 10 weeks. But there were other interns at Carney who actually were on like 2 or 3 projects, just depending on how long they lasted. So even if all of us were on one project the entire time, that wouldn't necessarily be the case, even as an intern.
Yeah. When I think back, there were probably what there was, Peyton was on too. Like,
there were a couple that
else?
It just depends. Are you at the beginning of the project or end of the project? My project ended my 9th week into the internship, but that started in November of last year. But so it went through several phases of the project. So each phase was about 3 months, but the project overall was about 9 months long. So I'd say 3 to 6 months is pretty standard. 9 months is a little long. Anything longer than that's decently long. But yeah, it just depends on when you get into consulting, you really push to get on projects. You're not just like, they don't draw your name out of a hat. So you kind of have the flexibility to push for whatever length of projects or where you want to go for your projects as well.
Yeah, you can turn down projects too if they're ones you're not interested in.
Oh, you can?
Yeah. Generally not like the first one, but later on. No, I want marketing. Marketing only. So. Any other questions on that? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, actually, but then I also know that Deloitte, they have like a Boston wing, which does they help informatics analytics.
Okay.
But so those are more based out of Boston. So you're like stationed in Boston, so kind of traveling these 4 days or 5 days. So do those kind of would the people coming here know about those opportunities too?
Yeah, they'll know about everything pretty well. So you ask away, they'll know more than I do for sure. But there's, at least when I was starting, I don't think Boston was one of the options for offices I was offered for the summer. But in the long term, there's a lot of opportunities to move around. So keep that in mind that this is just like a super short 10-week thing. It's going to go by, it's going to fly by so fast. You're going to try to get as much information as you can out of it. But in the long term, there's a lot of flexibility as to where you can be, things you're interested in to explore. So. And to further follow up on your first question, like for me anyways, my flights were like early Monday morning, and then I'd fly back Thursday afternoon or evening. So that was basically my schedule.
So are the consulting companies pretty big on frameworks and methodologies?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Are the companies focusing more on frameworks and methodologies, the ways of working or addressing the problem or the situation? Because would you learn those things during a course of your internship? Or
somewhat. We had like a 3-day primer on stuff like that. It was mostly just getting on the client site. They assume you have a lot of those skills already and that you're ready to perform. So it'll be more work-based for sure.
I know for my project, I had to call a lot on Carney's internal experts. And in doing so, and in doing a lot of my internal research to try and find the best solution for our client, you do stumble across a lot of these frameworks that Carney has developed over the course of time, and you may or may not be able to apply them at face value. You might have to modify them for your specific situation. But in my case, I did have some exposure to a lot of the frameworks that Carney has developed over the course of their history.
And it depends, totally depends on the project. Mine was something they hadn't really done a lot of before, so it was something that there wasn't a lot of frameworks involved, so we had to actually build one, so it just depends. So in the later round for your case interviews, it'll be a bit more structured. You'll be given actual data, like a few pieces of paper. They'll have various graphs and financial information or operations information that you'll have to analyze. So you have to figure out what's most important, what they're looking for, and potentially what's missing, like the example that was given earlier. Based on this, you'll ask all your follow-up questions. So they really won't give you all the information you'll need. You're going to need to ask clarifying questions. It'll be important to have practice doing this so you know exactly what questions you're going to want to ask and what information is likely missing to come to the solution you need. So, like I put here, it will test your industry knowledge and terminology as well as your general business knowledge. So there will be business-based questions. It's expected going into these that you have a solid business understanding and background, that you know how balance sheets work, how operations work, how companies make money, and how they can make more money. So keep that in mind. And yeah, it really does come down to practice. I don't know how many times I've said that already, but I can't emphasize it enough. Practice a lot. That's going to be extremely valuable for you throughout this process. And yeah, even though it's a later round case interview, it's going to be with partners or senior managers. It's still just a case interview. It's hopefully people you've met before, so go out of your way to meet them as early as you can and build that relationship so you're not going into a scary room with people you don't know. So it's still just an interview. Yes?
What are some of the resources that you have used to prepare for the interview?
Case in point. That was the big one that I used, and I'm going to talk about that right now.
Actually, Jeff, I had one thing about that last
Yeah, sorry.
slide. So the way it's described up here is exactly how Deloitte does it. Since A.T. Kearney is the other big recruiting consulting company here on campus, their final round, like bigger case interviews, are structured very differently. So with Deloitte, you're given the case or given the information, and you're there solving it right in front of them. For A.T. Kearney, you are given a case, like a multiple page case, and you're in a room by yourself for 75 minutes. And in that time frame, you have to do your analysis, come up with your recommendations, and put together a presentation. You then give that presentation to the senior managers or partners or whoever it might be in the audience, maybe 4 or 5 people. So it's not that one is more difficult than the other. They both require a lot of the same frameworks and mindsets to get to the solution, but the actual execution of how these things happen are different for each company.
Yeah, that sounds a bit more like case competition style. I don't know if anybody here has ever done a case competition, but if you get the opportunity, they're a blast. You'll just be given a ton of information, kind of like that too. You go to a room, figure out what the problems are, and then build a presentation. So, very good experience.
So is it the first round?
For this presentation and all that stuff?
Yeah.
No, that I only had to do that once. It was for my very last interview.
Oh, okay.
Everything prior to this was kind of like examples of those case questions Jeff had put up earlier, like, you know, how many used cars were sold in the U.S., like kind of like mini case questions I call them, that you do solve right in front of the person. That was what the earlier rounds entailed. And then this final interview had this, you know, locked away in a room, do your analysis, make a presentation.
You'll learn to enjoy it, I promise. So yeah, case in point, it's money. It was very valuable for me and for a lot of other people. I know for Deloitte in particular, they really value this book and the methodology that they use. So if you're interested in them, get a copy, work through it, get a partner, practice one-on-ones. And I can quickly go through some of these case in point commandments, which I ripped directly from them. So I just found these are all valuable things that I think were very valuable throughout my interviews. So as I said earlier, listening is huge. Keep that in mind. Keep listening. It's okay to interrupt them, or it's okay to ask them to slow down. Just don't interrupt necessarily. Try to do it nicely, because it's how you present yourself and your communication skills. They're going to be constantly judging you on that and determining if they can put you in front of a client. So always manage the image you're giving to them. Taking notes is huge valuable. You might be thinking, like Alicia was saying, keeping it all in your head. Don't attempt that. Try to write down as much as you can and take thorough notes, because often they'll give you information and then just ask you to recall it quickly. So it's valuable to have that right in front of you. And practice will help with this too, in ways of organizing your notes, because you'll need to be able to call on it quickly and have those notes available. So as soon as they ask, you have it. Keep it organized. Don't just have like a giant mess of numbers, and that'll come with practice, as well as using case in point, because they've got a few methodologies for structuring your notes. I noticed Andrew and Kevin, you guys have done a good job of it so far. So if anybody have questions, feel free to ask them. So, and not me. No, feel free to ask me anything. But they're good too. So the steps you'll want to go through is you'll listen, you'll take notes, you'll summarize the question just to make sure that you're looking for the right information. So it's important that you don't just go and try to solve the problem, because you want to know for sure that you're solving the exact problem you're looking for, and to determine if there is any other ideas and problems they might be looking for. So yeah, like I was saying, verify the objectives. Make sure there isn't anything else that matters. Like, they might frame the question as if they're only looking at revenue, for example, but in some cases it isn't. Sometimes it could be a market penetration problem. It could be anything. So make sure you know exactly what you're looking for, because they often won't give you all the information that you need. Like I was saying earlier.
Can they be tricky? Are there tricks in there?
I don't think they're not out to trick you. Like I was saying earlier, they're your friends. They're there to help you. They want you to do well. But part of it is they're going to give you potentially not enough information because they want to see that you can tell what's missing. So. And yeah, keep asking questions, clarifying questions, because we're not going to give you all the information. Ask lots. Use this opportunity to keep building that dialogue and keep the one-on-one going. And relationship's huge. And don't be shy. You don't want to be that person who's sitting there quietly just doing the math and just silent. So it's important to ask a lot of questions, keep the back and forth going.
Can I just add one quick thing?
Yeah, please.
Think about tricky. It's not tricky, it's just subtle. The difference between units per household and units per person, they're very different. So just make sure that, they're not trying to trick you, just make sure that you're subtly picking up on what it is. Because they may be talking about household, 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 and then they actually ask you the questions per person. For example, it's not tricky, it's just pay attention.
All right, since I don't want to talk this whole time, I'd like you to get a pen and paper if you have one in front of you. And keeping those things I just said in mind, try to figure out this problem. You guys are going to attempt it? Good. Yeah.
Something that works really well for this is ask your own clarifying questions and then answer yourself.
No.
Oh, you don't want to?
No, I was saying.
You want to ask you clarifying questions right now?
Yeah, that's the point of this. Good that you remembered the notes.
What do you mean by cars? Is it
Like
SUVs?
vehicles, all kinds of regular passenger cars. It would include passengers, cars, light trucks, things like that as well.
Trucks, so commercial
No, not commercial vehicles, just
passenger car.
yeah, personal vehicles. Good question.
We're talking about outright sales only, or with leases and things like that to be appropriate?
Just direct sales. Very good question.
Do you double count if these cars sold multiple times in a year?
Yes, you do.
So if a car is sold 3 times during a year, then we counted 3. Is that
Correct.
right?
What category car are you looking at, like sedans or a truck?
All cars.
All cars.
Yeah. So obviously at this point you don't have all the information to solve the problem.
Oh, probably
Because
answer
you're
with
right.
help.
Yeah.
We could assume, right?
Pardon?
We could assume a lot of information.
No, you should ask questions.
Oh no, I mean, if this is all that we have,
Yeah, this is all that you have.
Yeah, so-
you should ask me questions.
so if I don't know what the population of the country is, I can just assume, let's say 100 million.
No, it's 300 million.
We should know those
So we
kind of
should know
stuff
those things, right?
already.
Or you can ask me. Yeah. If you're not sure.
Does that make sense?
Pardon? Yeah, how many cars are sold? Yeah. Good question.
So when you're selling, from whose perspective you're looking at? Is it from manufacturer to wholesaler, then wholesaler to
I just
retailer,
So
then
read it very carefully, they'll answer your own question.
so
used cars?
yeah, to
Yeah,
clarify,
you're
used
right.
cars are when one person has a car
Yeah,
and
it's
they
used
sell it to
cars.
someone else.
And
Sorry, KT?
But there's also dealership and there's also company. It's just the car itself, it's second hand, that would just be
Yeah, so you could be a dealer as well selling a used car. That's a good question.
and how are you planning to use this information?
What do you mean?
I mean, you
To test
asked.
your
Nice.
knowledge.
I mean, you asked the question, and there should be a purpose behind what do you do with that, right? So this is I'm asking you. As a consultant, I'm asking you, so how are you planning to use this information and take the next step?
Just to see if you're good at case interviews. That's the purpose of this question.
Is this all recorded data, or what about Craigslist sales that go unrecorded?
That's a good question. I don't know. I hadn't thought of that.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I didn't get it.
So I
I
guess
said, is it Craigslist data? Like, is this only recorded
by
data, or is it
used,
Craigslist, like, cash
is there a threshold? So if it's been driven 100 miles, that's all that's on the odometer? Is that?
Yeah, then it would be used.
Okay.
Greg, comments? start making assumptions at this point. You've asked,
Yeah.
I would say you've asked enough clarifying questions that you need to start making your assumptions. State them out loud, see if that works or not.
Yeah, so if you have any assumptions, just,
So I don't know if you want to write on the board or you guys want to write on your own notes, but
yeah.
at this point,
So,
Let's try it.
pardon?
Try it. Assumptions.
Sure, yeah, what would an assumption be?
So there are 100 million household. I would
Okay.
assume there are
Yeah.
2 cars per household.
Very good assumptions.
And then I will assume, let's see, a third of the cars they just got new, a third of the cars that are it's bad breakdown, a fourth of the car that is new, half of the cars are in use, and then another a quarter of the cars are kind of people try to sell.
Okay, yeah,
So
that's fair.
yeah,
Can I make
that would
another
make it
assumption?
to
Can I make another assumption?
Yeah.
Sure, please.
Every 5 years, they replace.
Exactly, this is what I'm looking for. So the way I approached this was I said, okay, let's assume that a new car when it's bought, it's driven for 2 years on average. So that was a question I was hoping somebody would ask is, how long does it take until a car is first sold on average? And then you might ask, okay, how often are used cars resold? And then based on that and the number of cars in the population that you derive, you can figure out approximately how many are sold per year. Does that make sense?
how do you use the 5 years?
Well, you'd ask and then I'd give you a number.
so here's, for example, if you have 100 million households, each have 2 cars, that's 200 million cars. If you say half of those are used, half are new, that means there's 100 million used cars. If used cars are sold every 5 years, 100 million divided by 5 is 200, or it's 20 million cars per year sold in the used industry.
Yeah, so
That's how
that'd
you use it every 5 years to actually get to the cars.
This is how I would do it.
Is that right?
Pardon?
I got 18 million.
Yeah,
Is that right?
exactly, nailed it, yeah. That's exactly what I had. Okay, sorry.
My approach was, I just started with the whole population of the country,
Yep.
and then I boiled it down to how many of those folks do not need a car,
Mm-hmm.
folks who cannot afford a car,
Yeah.
folks who don't need a car probably depend more on the public transport.
Yeah.
Uh,
So you can say like, oh, well, I'm going to assume 20% of the population doesn't need a car, so I'll cut that.
oh, so you just don't cut the whole thing.
Yeah, you could do something like that, or you
Yeah, I
could
think
use
that's
either
a better
approach.
one.
But the point is that you take the approach, so that's a very good idea.
So I would just try to arrive at the figure. So I just took out maybe 100 million are maybe old and too old but too young to kind of drive a car.
Yeah.
And maybe 60 million are those guys who can't afford to buy a car.
Mm-hmm.
10 million are within those states with pretty good public transport.
Yeah.
New York, New Jersey,
They live in
others,
San
yeah.
Francisco or somewhere. in New York,
SFO,
yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah,
then-
so that's a great job. So then from there, you'd ask more questions
Then
and try to
this
narrow
point
it down.
comes in problem.
Yeah. So yes.
I assumed a population of 320 million, each family of four people. So I came down to 80 million families, and each family uses a car for like 4 years.
Yep.
I got down to a number of 20 million.
Okay,
20
perfect. So something like that, you'd want to ask some clarifying questions first to test if those assumptions are valid.
I was building on the
Yeah,
question that
yeah.
you
So
asked.
exactly, that's a very good approach. Though. So it's hopefully that's the point of this was to confuse you, so you guys didn't know what to do, to try to figure out a methodology that you could break down this problem into a way to come up with a reasonable number based on a whole bunch of wild, crazy assumptions. So,
One comment that your response triggered. When you're making your assumptions, use numbers that help you. And what I mean by that is if you know for a fact that the U.S. has 342 million people, don't use 342 million. Use like 330 million or 350 million.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a lot easier to divide and to do your math relatively quickly.
or even 300, that's what I always use.
Yeah.
Like keep it as simple as you can, because you don't want to screw up your numbers.
So is it all right to ask questions here for this type of questions? Mini
Oh,
case.
for sure, yeah.
Many
That's
cases.
exactly the type of question you see, and you'll have to ask a lot of questions, just like we kind of went through here.
It's not like just to start from your assumptions. I assume this and that, and based on this is the answer.
Well,
Isn't
you
it that
could
how
do
it
that
should
approach,
work?
But if you did that, you want to state your assumptions out loud so they can correct you if you're wrong. So it might be a better thing to say, okay, I'm going to assume there's 300 million people in the U.S. Is that a reasonable assumption? And then I'd have the opportunity to say yes, so you can move forward with that.
Okay.
So, and that helps build the back and forth as well.
And read their nonverbal cues, because sometimes when I'm kind of talking out loud and going through my problem, I'll start by saying, I'm going to assume there's 300 million people, and I won't necessarily ask for validation, but I'll kind of glance up, and if they're nodding, they're okay with that. If they kind of like stop and get a look of disbelief on their face, then you might want to start asking some clarifying questions around that assumption.
Yeah, and that's something important to keep in mind too, because they will, you can read a lot from their body language. If you're going off in a totally different direction, like you're saying, okay, well there's 2 million people who take the subway in San Francisco, therefore 50% of them will have cars, but only a quarter of them will have a used car because it's San Francisco and people there like to have fancy new cars. Like you're going in the total wrong direction. So it's more like, keep it general, try to read from what they're saying where you need to go. So any questions from that, or you guys, hopefully that's a reasonable idea of what to expect? Yes?
So in my calculation I just divided 80 million by 4 years that they use, but
Yep.
some people even have the habit of changing cars every year.
Yep.
They use cars only the used cars. So is it a reasonable assumption to say that the people who actually use only the used cars kind of change cars every 2 years, so I just multiply it by 2 or 1.5, something like that?
If you want to make that an assumption, as long as you're basing that on the average of the population, go for it.
Okay.
Again, that's something, just clarify that assumption's valid. If so, move forward.
So I think for me what's challenging with these is doing it in real time and talking them through it. Like,
Yeah.
how much time do you spend gathering your thoughts before you start like launching into the analysis?
Well, if I were to approach this, first I'd sit down, think about it for a second, restate the question, which gives you a second to kind of keep your brain going in the background, and then see that you're going in the right direction, and then just think logically, what are the things you're going to need to know to be able to give a reasonable answer to this? That's almost a good approach too, is just start writing down questions that you'll want answered to be able to figure it out. So, any other questions on that, or pretty good?
How many of these should we practice to feel
As
like?
many as you can.
As many as you can, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just as simple as you can. Like, don't think of the most complicated, like you said, counting subways. Just, if you were to do the most simple, how would a 6-year-old go through a process, like, dumb it down as much as you can. At least that's my
totally
opinion.
true, yeah.
Because that will get you in the right framework of going from simple and broad, and then as soon as you get more comfortable, then you could maybe go specifics. But don't try to jump too deep into anything complicated at all.
Good point. Keeping it as simple as possible while still addressing the most important points. You can really 80-20 these. Yes.
So once you have prepared your case, while you have given the time for preparation, and you have to present it to the board or the people who are interviewing, how did it go for you? Was it like in a room, you just sit on a table, take your paper out, show them this is what you did?
Yeah.
Or you just stand on the board, just write everything out and explain? How did it go?
For me, it was just on paper. I just walked them through, here's the calculations I used to get this answer. Based on our discussion and the assumptions that we went over, I expect that approximately 20 million used cars were sold in the U.S. in the past year. So you just state your solution, something like that.
Oh, sorry, this might be like my classroom setting kind of approach come up, so I googled it up and it's 40 million.
Okay.
And new
Sorry,
cars
Seth, you
15
were wrong.
million.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to do it, sorry.
Okay, note in the interview, don't do that.
Well, I figured this isn't, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's totally.
Yeah, it was killing me.
So I have another question, like new cars plus the old. So I came with the number 45 million cars sold in the whole year, new plus old. So I don't know the cutoff of the total new cars sold that year. Can I ask this particular assumption to the company, the person?
Yeah, you could ask like, what are the total numbers of cars sold? What percentage of those are used cars? You could ask anything like that to further break it down. Yeah.
The only assumption that I don't know is the number of cars sold, like the new cars sold to the automakers.
Yeah.
So that is something I don't know.
But you could ask that, and I might tell you that.
I can.
So that was something I had in mind, that what I give you would be the new cars, number of new cars sold.
Exactly.
Then how often they're kept before they're resold, and then how often used cars are sold.
Because in the 5-year cycle, some of the people might go for a new car.
Yeah.
How many assumptions are too much?
Once it gets too confusing. Just there's no answer for that. It just totally depends on the problem. So with something like this, I think we covered the important assumptions. I don't think you need any more than that. The other assumption I might include in that one would be, say, I don't know, you'd get your final number and then knock it down by like 20% to say these are the cars that died over that period that didn't make it to be resold. So that could be something.
Can you give a range somewhere between minus 20% and plus 20%, something like that? Or is it a hard number?
You could if you wanted to.
Okay.
But they might ask for a real number, in which case just give them the mean.
Okay.
just a big picture back of the envelope thing to see that you understand the questions you need to ask. I think if you think about sold back to dealer, it gets too complicated of something that's, they just want a ballpark. Like it's plus or minus a few million. Like it's not, yeah. Like yeah, no big deal, yeah. So. All right, so moving back on to some more of the case in point stuff. So this might answer some of those questions that we're just asking. So you want to organize your answer, structure it, and then present it at the end. You'll know when that is because it'll be obvious. You'll want to think before you speak and just do like a double quick check to make sure that your numbers are valid and not completely random. Thinking, oh wait a second, I missed 3 zeros. It was actually 100,000 sales. Like it's important to just take a double check. Don't just blurt anything out that the first thing that comes to your mind. And of course, managing your time. Like if there's something you're really stuck on and you can't figure out, try to ask clarifying questions on it. And if they're not giving you anything on it, then it's probably not that important, and you should probably just move on to another aspect of the problem. Because they have the information they need to give you. If it's something I don't have information, like on like a Craigslist sale, like obviously it's not that important then because I hadn't even thought of it myself. So it's not what I'm trying to test you on. So although it may be important in reality, it's not important in the sense of this case. So.
How long does it usually take per question for this many cases?
15 to 30 minutes was the estimate I give.
No, for this type of questions. How 1 minute, 2 minutes? How much?
I would say maybe 5 minutes or less for like one question like that.
Something like that, there would probably be add-ons at the end too. It might be trying to forecast used car sales in the future, and it could be like a multi-step type problem. Like once you get to that answer, then they give you more information for the next question. So, yes.
I personally okay with market size ones.
Yeah.
There are a lot of times they test you about like Boeing 747.
Yeah.
So should we Google dimensions and weight?
No, definitely not. No, don't Google anything like that. Your numbers
like
can.
At this stage, preparation stage, should we collect some information?
I wouldn't at all.
I would say no. There's going to be an infinite number of things that you could Google to try. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wikipedia is your consulting firm. But no, totally not. Like even if you're off by a magnitude of 1,000 of like the size of an airplane, it doesn't matter. The numbers aren't that important. All that matters is that you calculate it out accurately.
So they won't be saying like, oh, that's an idiot. You don't even have a basic idea about the weight or length.
Well, like you should know it's like longer than 10 feet. Like
okay.
You should have an idea of like how long a foot is and how long an airplane might be. Like if you were to say it's 100 feet long or 300, I don't know. I don't care. Like it doesn't really matter.
And if they think something you did is like really fundamentally wrong, they might let you go through it and kind of question that piece at the end. So I was asked last year how many breakfast croissants Starbucks serves in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and I started with the assumption of how many Starbucks there were, and I don't know